Hello, dear seekers of light and truth. Here's another video going over the next phase of New Bro's life and attempts to popularize Oahspe with the general public, especially with the spiritualists of the United States. It is entitled 1882-1883, A Struggle for Power. And it was a struggle also for acquiring fame for Mr. Newbro and for Oahspe. He badly mishandles this, and that as a representative of, or the high prophet or high priest, you'd think he would be circumspect about presenting Oahspe in the gospel light by being on his best behavior, and that is trying to establish power relationships with the spiritualists, especially with all the New Agers. But that's not what happened. Instead, it became confrontational, where he was condemning them, and Oahspe's, the publishing, the funds derived from the sales of the books, of the Bibles of Oahspe, that those alone would be enough to fund and maintain kindergarten schools. And theoretically, it could have been used to fund fund the Shalom colonies in New Mexico. However, that was not to be, because he turned people away by not being a very nice person, by being very angry and arrogant. And that hurt the movement badly. So in October of 21st, Newbro still had hopes that publishing Oahspe would create income for his Oahspe Association, his lodge, his Faithless Lodge of New York, to be able to carry out their different plans. One of the plans was to establish kindergarten homes for orphans. And certainly the idea of helping orphan children, that's a good thing. So I'm not blaming him for wanting to do that. He never really succeeded in doing it. And the reason was because of all these contradictory stories, because of his abandoning of his wife, because he kept berating the spiritualists with public denunciations, people started turning away from him. And so the Oahspe sales plummeted. He couldn't sell enough books to finance any of his plans. So anyway, there was no idea of having a spirit, like an organic utopia at this point. He had turned to the idea of just having kindergartens, kind of an orphanage, where children could be taught spiritually good ideas, which I'm all in favor of. But if you've got a guy who's working with people who molest children, if he's banning his wife for a young woman, if he's being very negative to all the people who are on a good spiritual path, well, that's not the person to be raising children. In December of 1882, the same Oahspe publishing company that published Oahspe in January of the same year, they published a book called Kindergarten Homes. And again, this goes along what he declared in the October meeting, that the goal of his Oahspe Faithless Lodge was to start these spiritually oriented kindergartens for children. And a book was published to help promote this, but he didn't use his name. He used the donor, the philanthropist, the spiritualist philanthropist, Mrs. Elizabeth Thompson. He put her name on the book, okay? And even though he wrote it, I mean, you could just look, if you just go ahead and read it, it's online. It sounds exactly how he talks in his other books, and my linguistic proof of what Newbro wrote in Oahspe, and this book came out on him writing it, okay? So there is linguistic proof that he wrote it. So why the deception? I think because she was a richer and had a better reputation. At this point, he doesn't really have much of a reputation. So the idea was to use Miss Thompson's reputation. She never wrote it. He wrote it, and you can tell. It's interesting that he wrote about the rich can help us. So once again, he's turning, his faith is in the rich, not in the Creator. Okay. Another book also was written, or actually it's written and published at this time, called Figures of Hell, and it dealt with alcohol and the idea that alcohol was very destructive, and he's very right. I guess you could say he was jumping on the bandwagon for this cause, again in the hopes of rallying people to Oahspe to show, hey, I'm John Newbro. I'm not the guy who's leaving his wife and upsetting everybody with the Egyptian ceremonies and calling out the spiritualists as frauds. I'm the guy who's going to rally spiritual morality for society. And the Figures of Hell basically was a pretty good book. From the parts that I've read, he gives very good analysis about how all these different statistics prove that, in fact, alcohol is very destructive to our society, and we need to really take some serious steps. Prohibition, maybe? And I don't blame him for writing that, but I do blame him for using Miss Thompson's good name. Again, it's just more deception. And this guy basically said, whatever works, doesn't matter if it's true. He made a lot of mistakes, and he's certainly a dishonest person. He believed his own lies, I'm sure. Even though I never channeled Oahspe, I'm sure after telling everybody that you do and playing the part of the prophet, you tend to believe your lies and you think you're above everyone else. And anyway, she didn't write it, but just like she didn't write kindergarten homes for children, but Newbro needed her good name to draw people, especially the rich circle of people that she was associated with. It's kind of ironic too, because again, I have some words here on this page about how the terrible effects of alcoholism is for Oahspe. Let me rephrase that. It's very clear from Newbro's work in the Figures of Hell that alcohol does have terrible effects upon society, upon families, upon the women and children who suffer because their husband or father are drunkards. And this is very ironic because a few years later, when he's living with Miss Thompson, he condemns her for drinking beer and wine in her own home. And this is very ironic, since he also falsely proclaimed Miss Thompson as the writer of the Figures of Hell, which is basically a pro-prohibition, anti-alcohol book, and yet here she is drinking beer and wine, and Newbro is really disapproving of it. I'm not saying you can't disapprove of people drinking, but to publicly communicate that to others is not a great way to go. And no doubt if she drank a glass of wine, it was probably pretty limited. She's a very refined person from all accounts, and she might have had a cup of wine. I think this mostly had more to do with the fact that he was beginning to realize that she wasn't, because of his bad behavior, the Thompsons were not going to let him take over their farm for the new Shalom community. And so this is just his way of discrediting her in his own mind, blaming her instead of blaming his own bad behavior. At any rate, before and during Shalom, Newbro went to great efforts to start lodges around the United States. And sure, the idea of people coming together for spiritual study is not a bad thing in itself. And of course, the Masons do this themselves. The problem is that a lot of the focus is on strange symbols, past secret religions, past false religions, past secret mystic systems. And that is not communicating directly with the Creator when you've got a master and priest telling you what to think, what to pray. And so it does much more harm than good. In fact, why even have Oahspe at all if you're going to do this? Because what you're doing basically is saying, okay, Christianity, Islamism, Hinduism, Buddhism, those are terrible false religions. Instead, why don't you do this? We can take all the past religions of the past and basically worship other false gods under the guise of it being dishonestly within Oahspe itself. Hey, and I'll be the high priest, and you can pray these rites with me. And we're back to square one. So everything Oahspe preached correctly, which the doctrine said, hey, free your mind, communicate directly with the Creator, and do good things. Don't spend your time, all your time, just studying strange symbols and words, and free yourself. That's what Oahspe's message was. And yet here Newbro's putting the manacles on right away. He's got them all in these lodges, whether it's in California, New York, or Boston. He's setting it up so it's just another religion, worse in many ways than the established false religions. And if that wasn't enough trouble, and so we have a very fateful letter, 1883, January 27th, Banner of Light, where Newbro harshly criticizes spiritualists for various failings. I mean, he's saying, well, gosh, you aren't doing enough to create mediums. Gosh, you're not doing enough to help the poor. And so he condemns them publicly. And what he should have recognized instead is, well, there is a spirit. The spiritualists were basically saying, don't listen to what the false religions are saying. Instead, think for yourself and listen to what the spirits in the spirit world have to say. Think about it. Don't blindly accept it. And follow a universal creator. And that was the extent of what the spiritualism movement was about. Of course, there were groups and movements within spiritualism to create utopias, and some of them did go out there and try to do that very thing. So it was very disingenuous of Newbro to condemn spiritualists for not doing more for the poor when they actually had been trying. There were hundreds of communes or communities of spiritualists around the United States. They didn't. Almost all of them failed. I mean, so it wasn't true. And he also managed to insult all the Christians as well at the same time. I think he burned a lot of bridges is what I'm trying to say. And people got angry with him and the sales went down. Here's the crazy guy yelling at everyone when there's nothing to really blame them about. Society is a mess, but that's not the spiritualists' fault. So after that, the sales went down. Less people would go to his public meetings. Again, he's putting himself on a very high horse and telling people, well, geez, you don't have mediums set up, system set up mediums. Instead, you're just letting it naturally happen. Gee, you guys are really incompetent. And, oh, gee, there's someone who's taking care, here's a Catholic lady taking care of orphan babies, and yet, oh, spiritualists, what are you doing? I condemn you for not doing it. Well, you could have condemned everyone in the United States for that. Why pick on a spiritualist? The reason is because the Masons want their power over everyone. And Newbro wanted to replace the spiritualists. He wanted everyone who would follow the spiritualist message of love and harmony and becoming one with the angelic heavens. He wanted to take that crowd, bring them under his tent, and so he attacked them so people would leave their group. But the consequence was the opposite of what he intended. People just said, man, this guy's really negative, and he's angry about things. He's blaming people for things they have nothing to do with. And it was, again, very detrimental. So Oahspe never did become super popular after initial outburst. And the reason it didn't spread like wildfire is because Newbro was like the worst ambassador of Oahspe you could ever have. I mean, you've got this guy condemning people for things which really they shouldn't have been blamed for. I mean, society certainly had problems, but spiritualism was part of the solution, not the problem. But here he was blaming them for that which they had no part creating in the first place. And if it sounds like, why would you do that? Well, you wouldn't do it if you were trying to be uniting the different spiritual paths in a harmonious way. But Newbro wanted to be the big cheese, the one who would control everything. So his hope was that by attacking the spiritualism groups, that they would be disgraced and that everyone would say, oh, Newbro is the only one who really cares about creating mediums and rescuing the children from the slums. So we better follow him. That's what Newbro wanted. But he did it with anger, and it was very unfair to blame spiritualism for the problems of society. Spiritualism had been trying through utopias and through setting people's minds free from the false religions, which had brought so much misery into the world through replacing people's direct connection with the Creator with something that was a shadow of the spiritual life they could have, because they always had the priests and rabbis and whoever else the masters controlling the people. The world is always a better place. The more people who have a direct inspiration from the Creator and they're following their inner heart, that's the best way to go. That's what Oahspe itself promotes, and that was the exact opposite of what Newbro was talking about. So this did not happen just once, and I asked the AI to create like a history of the things Newbro would write about in various publications. And so he was traveling about or just sending the letters to the newspapers and condemning people for not for being part of spiritualism. To be honest, the Age of Cosmon, 1848, right? And that was the dawn of spiritualism, okay? And that was a part of the Creator's plan to create more truth and light in the world. People would turn away from the false dogmas that false religions have been basically enchaining people's minds with, so they wouldn't think for themselves, wouldn't even conceive of communicating directly with the Creator and following their highest light. So spiritualism should have been applauded by Newbro. If he really understood what Oahspe is about, it should have been the shining moment of spiritualism to have Oahspe basically saying, hey, turn from the false religions and turn to the Creator, develop your spiritual senses, your seership, your mediumship, and let's have Oahspe and spiritualism be as one. But instead, he was attacking them, and because he wanted he wanted the whole movement to be under him, even though he had really nothing to do with Oahspe other than stealing it and sabotaging it. So for the next few years after Oahspe was published, you can read this as you will, pause the video, Okay, that concludes this video on this section of Newborough's life and his attempts to make Oahspe a new age religion with him as the chief prophet. And of course, that's not the goal of Oahspe itself. The goal of Oahspe has always been to teach all of mankind, all men and women, how to communicate directly with the Creator, to have a knowledge of how resurrection and progression in the spiritual realms takes place, exactly what is the process, and also to learn how to control oneself so that one works not just for earthly pleasures, but to work for the upliftment of all humankind, to found communities of love, peace, and harmony. And although that is Newborough's stated goal, the actual atmosphere he created around his lodges was not of liberation, is one of servitude to the masters who ran the lodges, and to him most of all. And it was one of arrogance over all other spiritual paths, especially New Age path spiritualism. That's the one group he should have appealed most to, because Oahspe promotes spiritualism. However, it was not to be, because he was a very selfish, angry, self-seeking person, not at all the person who was chosen to make Oahspe such a popular book. And it's a darn shame. Thank you for